Hi, my name is Kimberly from Zeidman Development. Today I'm going to show you how you can work with the consent area of Razor's Edge when using both Chimpegration Pro and Chimpegration Cloud. So the first thing you'll need to do is to set up the combination of channel and categories that you want to use with Chimpegration in your business rules, and also any solicit codes that you want to work with as well. Once you've done that, there are a few different ways that you can manage consent from MailChimp into Razor's Edge. So the first way we can do it, if we've been working with MailChimp for a while, we want to bring in our historic consent options, we can use the Manage Audiences function. And that allows us to retrieve the data from an entire audience. We just choose a matching criteria, we create control reports, and then we can choose to work with either our subscribers, our unsubscribers, or our star ratings. The subscribers and unsubscribers work with the consent area. So if I wanted to bring in all of the people who have historically subscribed to that audience, I just click on the consent button and I can fill this out in the exact same way that I ordinarily would if I was doing a global ad. I can add a consent statement and a privacy policy, and then I can choose what to do where there are existing consent records. So do I want to always add a new consent record regardless of what's there already? Or do I want to ensure I'm not creating a duplicate and therefore choose what I want to match on? So as well as the consent channel, I can also match on the category, the date, the response, and the source. And think about those matching options quite carefully, because if you haven't got that set up quite right, then you could end up adding duplicates, or you could end up not adding anything at all. And we can see that the subscriber opt-in date is going to be used as the date of consent. Once we've done that, we can add all the consents for that audience. We can either choose to retrieve the records from a certain date. If you've never run this before, it can show you either all time, or you can select a date range. And then we can do the same thing with the unsubscribes, and we can simply select an opt out or whatever options you've set up instead. So that's the best way to get started if you haven't used the consent area before. You can then run this process for each audience on a regular basis to bring in your new subscribes and unsubscribes. But there are other ways that you can manage this as well. So for example, you could use the Manage Campaigns area to work with your unsubscribe records. So we select a campaign rather than an audience we want to work with. So we could choose this one here. We can get our unsubscribes. Once again, we can create a control report. We can create a query now as well, and we can ignore previously processed records. Our record matching is the same as usual. And then our process here can include a consent record. So this would be useful if you wanted to do more than just add a consent. If you also wanted to say, mark somebody as do not email, or mark as do not contact, or add an attribute, or change a type, then we could do that here. And then we can add the consent record in exactly the same way as we did before, with the same matching options and the same options to make sure we don't create duplicates. And again, that's something we can run on a regular basis going forward to keep up to date with our unsubscribes. The other option we've got is to give people the option to choose what emails they receive from us when they sign up for our audience. So let's take a quick look at what I've got set up in my MailChimp audience. In the groups area, I've got some mailing preferences set up. And when people subscribe to my audience, they can choose what ones of these they want to receive. So they've got the choice of event invitations, our weekly newsletter, and our news reports. And they can either choose to subscribe or not subscribe to those. These groups are then reflected in my synchronization data, so I can bring that information back into Razor's Edge on that more granular level. So if we go to the synchronize option, we select the query we want to synchronize with. We can also choose a segment. Our mapping looks exactly the same as it ordinarily does. And now in the groups area, we can see my mailing preferences. And if I click on edit, you can see that I've chosen for this group to match to a consent record. And if I look at the configuration, then we can see that I've got what I'm going to do with people who have subscribed or unsubscribed from MailChimp to Razor's Edge. So if I've got the group in MailChimp, what do I want to do in Razor's Edge? If they've got the group, I want to add an opt-in. If they don't have the group, I want to add an opt-out in the consent record. The other way around, we're going to push from Razor's Edge to MailChimp. So if people have got the solicit code of no events, we're going to remove the event invitations group. If people have got the newsletter list solicit code, then we're going to add the weekly newsletter group. Or if they don't have the newsletter list, we want to remove the weekly newsletter group. So we can set this up so that it's in line with how we create these in Razor's Edge. So once that's okay, then we can run that synchronization. So when we come to the review screen, we can see our usual information about what's going to happen from MailChimp to Razor's Edge and vice versa on the constituent fields. But what we can also see here is what's going to happen with their mailing preferences. So the mailing preferences group is going to add this information to Razor's Edge. So we'll take a look at that in a moment. We can also see that for this record, we're going to push mailing preferences out to MailChimp. So we're going to push the events and newsletter lists into the various areas of MailChimp, so we can take a look at this record as well. So let's run that process. So we can see we've got 2 new records on Razor's Edge, 2 updated records on MailChimp, 2 updated groups on Razor's Edge, and 1 updated group on MailChimp. So let's go and take a look at those. So we can see my 2 created records here. Let's take a look at this one. So we can see that we've got the solicit code of newsletter list and the solicit code of no report. If we go to the consent record, we can see we've got the opt-in for invitations, the opt-in for newsletters, and the opt-out for reports. So that's been reflected in the solicit codes as well. So now if I go to the record that we've updated on MailChimp, if we take a look in the groups here, we can see that we've added event invitations and news reports to the groups on MailChimp too. So now that we've had a look at how we can bring consent in using Chimpegration Pro, let's take a look at what we can do with Cloud. So there are a couple of different options here. First of all, we can use the import area. So when we're bringing in new subscribers and updates from MailChimp to Razor's Edge in Cloud, we can set up the consent at the same time. So we can either do this as an ad hoc, a scheduled, or a real-time process. It doesn't make any difference which we use. Our audience selection and time frame is the same as before, as is our matching. We set up our field mapping as usual. And then when we come to our default values, we can add a consent to any new records that we create. So we can set up the channel and category as we ordinarily would. We can set up the response, the source, and we can use their subscription date to create that consent record. We can also add the consent statement and privacy notice as we ordinarily would. And again, we've got these options to ensure that we're not creating a duplicate consent record. We can also do this for existing constituent records as well. If they're on Razor's Edge, we're adding an update, but they don't have that consent record showing that they've opted into our mailing list. We can add that at the same time. We've also then got the same option here that we saw in Chimpegration Pro, which is in our campaign management area. We can set up a consent for our unsubscribes. So let's take a look here. So I've got this set up as a real-time unsubscribe. So we choose the audience that this should work on. So this is great for new data going forwards. And then when we do the process here, again, this is useful if we want to do more than one thing. We can add the consent record in exactly the same way as we did before. So I've got the opt-out here, and I've got the same matching options as I did before. And this will then run every single time somebody unsubscribes from that audience without me having to do anything manually. So then, of course, when that real-time unsubscribe fires, we go to our card on Chimpegration Cloud. We can see the record that's been updated. If we open that in Razor's Edge, NXT, we can see that consent record's been added here. We can see the source, and we can see when it was added. So wherever you add the consent, it's always reflected both on NXT and in database view. I hope that helps you to use the consent module of Razor's Edge with Chimpegration. Thanks for listening.